I was able to participate in the recent Wardogs closed alpha, and one of the things that interested me the most was just how much there is to learn and do while also being rewarded for it. There's just a massive amount of things going on in this game. That complexity isn't necessarily a bad thing. It adds depth, and learning all those systems can eventually create that feeling of mastery and accomplishment as you understand more and become better at the game. But I also found parts of the gameplay loop just tedious, frustrating, and sometimes boring, even after I had a better understanding of what was going on. So I think this was the main tension throughout my experience of the weekend. When does all this complexity create meaningful depth, and when does it just create friction? Before I get more into things, I want to say these aren't all of my thoughts about the test, just some of the main things that stood out over my roughly 15 hours of playtime. And because I spent a lot of that time sniping, I'm going to do a separate video specifically focused on that experience as well. When it comes to the learning curve of the game, I think the first thing that was important here is that most of us seem to be learning what the hell was going on to begin with. Unless you're already coming from something like Arma Squad or the King of the Hill mode that Wardogs is based on, I think it could easily take around 20 hours or so just to start getting a real feel for the game. There are just so many interconnected systems that it just takes time to understand what you're supposed to be doing, let alone becoming efficient at it. And again, I actually like that to some extent, as there is something rewarding about slowly learning these systems and realizing you're making much better decisions than you were 10 hours earlier. But there were also times where I understood what was happening and still just wasn't that engaged with the action. Sometimes that simply was because my team completely zerged the hot zone and the other teams were practically non-existent. Although this is something that I expect to improve as more people understand the game and play it. One of the other areas that created some of this boredom was when it came to dying and getting back into the game. I know that developers have talked about death essentially being your punishment, and I understand what they're going for. If survival matters, your equipment, positioning, and decisions will matter more as well. My issue here is that not every death really feels like the result of some meaningful decision that I made. There were times where I had difficulty just figuring out where shots were coming from, or even seeing the person who was actively shooting at me, even though I was looking in their direction and they were only 40 or 50 meters away. There was another time I didn't even make it halfway to the play area due to the clunkiness of the vehicle handling, as the quad I was driving lost control for some reason, sliding into something and killing me. So when punishment is significant, those random or difficult to read deaths can feel pretty awful. Now, to be fair here, these occurrences didn't happen that often, but they did happen here and there, and it felt horrible each time. I think the revive window kind of plays a role here also. You can wait quite a while because maybe somebody's going to come get you, but being around teammates doesn't necessarily mean anyone actually will. There were even times where I didn't go for a revive myself because I knew how long it was going to take, so the cash incentive there just wasn't enough. But I think this could be offset by making the standard revive somewhere around 10% faster. That would give me a little more incentive to be there and revive somebody, even though it's going to take longer without one of those devices like a defib. Now, if you don't get a revive, you potentially respawn at the headquarters and have to travel a pretty significant distance to get back into the fight. Now, there are multiple ways of transportation back to the zone, including helicopters and spawning on your team's transport vehicle, assuming it's active and in the zone. But I just found the headquarters overall to be a little bit too far away. Maybe moving them about 15 or 20% closer would help, but again, I do understand that this affects the logistics, the supply runs, how quickly tanks and vehicles reach the battlefield, which in turn affects a bunch of other systems. So I'm not saying move everything right next to the fight at all, but the combination of waiting for a revive and then traveling all the way back does create a lot of downtime and boredom in my opinion. Now, to be clear, I don't want them to just make this change here outright. We did play an early play test of this, so the entire experience was not really had. Once the game is in early access and the player base gets a good feel for everything, myself included, then I think that would be a better time to look at this and make this change or not. The economy itself is something that I think is really interesting here, because it doesn't just reward players, but it shapes how the game functions. On one hand, it can free players to find usefulness out of tasks that would otherwise be mundane, but on the other hand, it can also shape how somebody plays the game itself. Punishing death can encourage smarter decisions, but it can also encourage people to avoid taking risks completely. If I'm financially better off letting someone else push the objective while I sit somewhere safe, some players are naturally going to do that. And I think the reward side of the economy could potentially help balance this problem. Ultimately, if we're asking players to take more risk for the team, there obviously should be more opportunities for that additional risk to pay off. What's probably an even better example of this comes down to sniping. From watching other people's videos, distance bonuses could give a ton of additional cash per kill, and this included sitting outside of the main engagement area. So ultimately, the game was financially encouraging snipers to move further away from their squad and their team and the actual fight. When it came to the match length, they did seem to be extremely long at times. There were definitely games that became so one-sided and lasted long enough that I eventually just stopped feeling invested and left. At the same time, I don't think I can fully judge out the pacing yet either. Everyone was still learning and players were gradually unlocking things like tanks, so we weren't really seeing what a mature match would look like in these situations. Longer matches also have some advantages here as well, as they give things like base building, supply runs, fortifications, and heavier equipment enough time to actually become meaningful. But after getting to experience the game, I now understand much better as to why the developers talked about players jumping in and out of matches. You can get on, accomplish something, make some cash, and leave without necessarily treating every match like something you need to finish from beginning to end. However, I wouldn't mind seeing some additional incentives for staying though, maybe a larger completion bonus of some kind, or like a stepped reward based on how long you participated in the match. The team aspect here was probably the thing that I enjoyed the most. When I had a good squad or coordinated team, the game became substantially more enjoyable. A lot of the systems started making more sense because transportation, revives, objectives, and staying alive all had an actual purpose within what the group was trying to accomplish. Obviously, this is still difficult to fully gauge here during a test where everybody seems to be learning and trying to figure out what the flow is of the game. But I do think that this is an area with a ton of potential and something I expect will naturally improve as the player base becomes more familiar with the game. There were some small things that I'd like to see addressed directly. The vehicles I drove, again, like I mentioned earlier, felt pretty clunky. The quad especially seemed to lose control easily, but so did some of the other vehicles. And oftentimes it felt like there was a delay between my input and the vehicle responding. I think something like loadouts could also be helpful here, even if it's just a weapon setup. Let me prepare something beforehand and quickly be able to purchase it in-game if I have enough cash. It's a small thing, but it saves a little bit of time and makes it less likely that I'm rushing through the menus and forgetting something. I think it would also be extremely helpful if we had weapon statistics that would make it easier to compare between guns. So overall, I'd say I'm still kinda on the fence about where I stand with Wardogs. I think people coming from Arma Squad or that King of the Hill mode are probably going to understand what the game wants from them much faster and will probably take to it much more naturally. For somebody like me, coming primarily from faster, more casual shooters, there's definitely an adjustment that has to be made. Wardogs is slower paced, there's more downtime, and the consequences for dying are substantially higher. At the same time, the game isn't so hardcore that it completely turns me away. A lot of the systems I found frustrating are also just a part of what gives Wardog its identity, so I'm not asking them to drastically change the direction of the game, and I actually ended up pre-ordering it anyways because I think the foundation here is good and the direction that they have seems solid. At this point for me, the question going forward is how much of what I found frustrating improves as I learn to understand the game better, and how much of it continues to bother me even after I do. But I'm curious, if you played the test, what were your initial impressions of Wardogs? And if you didn't, what are you most looking forward to seeing more of or trying for yourself in-game? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. I'll catch you on the next one. RAMTEID out.